Jeremy Dickinson here. In this video lecture, I'd like to continue talking about Plato's Apology, and in particular what I want to do is pick up where I left off from part 1 of my video lecture series on the Apology, and so this is going to be part 2 of my discussion of Plato's Apology. So we recall at the end of part 1 that Socrates has been defending himself against the earlier accusers, and we saw there that his method of defense was explanation. And he told his famous wisdom story, which involved him trying to interpret the oracle at Delphi, who maintained that there is none wiser than Socrates. And Socrates went around trying to find someone wiser than he is in hopes of figuring out what the oracle could have meant, because Socrates is very surprised by the claim that there's none wiser than he is. And he ends up going to the politicians, the poets, and the craftsmen, and he finds that in fact there is none wiser than he in Athens, and this leads him to conclude with the claim that human wisdom doesn't amount to much. So ultimately, Socrates' interpretation of the oracle's claim that there's none wiser than he is the idea that when one is like Socrates in realizing that one lacks philosophical wisdom, then one can't be wiser than that individual. So there'd be none wiser than Socrates in this circumstance, because he was someone who realized that he lacks philosophical wisdom. I think put in a different way, the idea is that human wisdom doesn't amount to much, and Socrates realizes this, and it's really the wisdom that the gods have that amounts to something. The gods have a particular special kind of knowledge, particular special kind of wisdom that human beings lack. And it's when you're aware of this that you become such that there's none wiser than you. Okay, so that's Socrates' interpretation of what the oracle has to say. How does this fit in with his defense? Because again, Socrates' aim here ultimately is to defend himself against his earlier accusations that he busies himself studying the things in the sky and below the earth, and makes the weaker argument appear stronger. So how exactly does interpreting the oracle's claim that there's none wiser than he amount to a defense? Well, it doesn't all by itself amount to a defense, but it helps explain where the charges came from. So again, if Socrates can show that, or can explain where the charges came from, he feels that the audience, the jury, should arrive at the conclusion that he is not guilty of those accusations as such. So let's see if we can connect things here a bit. So Socrates claims next that he ended up having a lot of youth groupies following him around. What does this mean? Well, there were those who were the sons of the rich in Athens who followed Socrates around as he went around trying to interpret the oracle. And he's going to maintain that many of the youth, they actually derive a kind of pleasure in watching Socrates go around and question people, and ultimately they took pleasure in Socrates showing people who thought that they were wise in the relevant ways actually not be wise. So Socrates uncovers or reveals to people that they lack the wisdom that they think that they have. The youth take pleasure in this, and of course the youth do what the youth do. They begin to imitate Socrates, so they go around and begin questioning people in an effort to show that they don't have the wisdom that they claim to have. As you can imagine, Athenians are upset about this. They get upset at the youth and maintain that the youth are following this man Socrates, and they want to blame Socrates. Socrates is the adult after all, for the behavior of the youth. And so there are lots of Athenians who get upset at Socrates, and perhaps people who have persuasion and power in ancient Athens, because again, the youth who are following Socrates were the children of the wealthy. So how does this ultimately lead to a defense? Well, what happens is um, many Athenians are complaining about Socrates, and um, as they're doing so, they're asked, what is Socrates doing to the youth such that they're behaving in this way? What is he teaching them? And a common response was that what Socrates is teaching the youth is, um, or consists of, um, uh, what Socrates studies in the sky and below the earth, and how to make the weaker argument appear stronger. And so these general accusations got really developed in this kind of way. It was a kind of response to um, the questions that people had about what Socrates was doing to the youth to make them behave in the ways that they were acting. They seemed like they were being corrupted. What were they being corrupted by? Well, they were being corrupted by Socrates' teachings about things in the sky and below the earth, and about learning how to make the weaker argument appear stronger. Now, what's important here is that Socrates maintains that these are just very, very stock and standard answers that are given to the question, what is Socrates doing to the youth to make them behave in such a way, to corrupt them? And they weren't in any way indicative of what Socrates was up to. I mean, Socrates, again, was about trying to interpret the teaching of the oracle, that there's none wiser than he is. So he wasn't teaching the youth these things. But if you were an Athenian who went around Athens talking to people, maybe doing philosophy or claiming to teach people, I should say, then you were often labeled as someone who was a busybody with respect to studying things in the sky and below the earth and making the weak argument appear stronger. So again, these are just stock and standard kinds of accusations that were given to lots of Athenian intellectuals who were looked upon disfavorably by their fellow Athenians. So Socrates says that's where the slanderous accusations come from. They come from an answer to the question, what Socrates is doing to make the youth behave in this way. But more still needs to be said about how these, how this amounts to a defense. Well, it amounts to a defense because Socrates is saying, look, what I'm doing is going out and trying to interpret the oracle, who made this very surprising claim to me about my wisdom. But I'm being accused of doing these other things. Now, what do these other things amount to? We see how Socrates could be exonerated of these accusations if he's right that this is what he was doing, and perhaps this is what Socrates was doing. We should take what he says here at face value, but maybe be helpful in thinking about these accusations to see how they would exactly exonerate him. And so think about the first accusation. He busies himself studying things in the sky and below the earth. Well, this is a kind of damning accusation in ancient Athens, because if you did such a thing, then you were often associated with philosophers who were known as naturalists. And the naturalists were those who were trying to do a better job, if you will, explaining the things that happen naturalistically in our experiences. The idea here is that there were many traditions that were prevalent in ancient Athens. The Homeric tradition was a very prominent one, and it's one that had lasting influence, even though it was a few centuries before Socrates' time. But it had much influence because there we see the development of the pantheon of the Greek gods, and the Greek gods are used to explain natural events. So there's a storm occurring in the sea, which Odysseus is afflicted by, and Odysseus is praying to the god Jupiter to stop the storm. And when you read Hesiod and in his works, you see even more and more an effort to explain natural events in supernatural terms. Well, those who went about studying things in the sky and below the earth were claiming that we could understand, say, the sun and the moon, which were understood as divinities or deities, in naturalistic ways. And this smacked of a kind of atheism. So Socrates is getting lumped in here with a group of thinkers who were responding to the early supernaturalism of the Homeric and Hesiotic traditions. And Socrates then is getting lumped in with kind of naturalism, and what comes with that is a kind of atheism. If you're going to start studying the moon and the sun, think about Apollo here as a sun god. You are claiming that we can study an object like the sun, like we can study other objects in the natural world, but that goes against the Athenian religious beliefs. And so those who were naturalistically inclined and trying to do this naturalistic work were associated with atheism. So Socrates is being slandered here, according to him, as being an atheist. Of course, Socrates thinks that he's doing the work of the god by going out and interpreting the oracle, who is a godlike entity himself. So that charge has significance because it associates Socrates with a naturalist and an atheist thinker in ancient Athens, which would have been a crime to be an atheist. Now, the charge of making the weak argument appear stronger, Socrates here is being identified with and lumped in with thinkers who are known as sophists, who were looked down upon by many Athenians, not all, but many. And the sophists were these men who went around the ancient Greek city-states claiming to teach people or to get them to become more persuasive in their oratorical endeavors. So they were well known for going around claiming to teach sometimes, other times just claiming to help people become more persuasive, and typically in the political arena in order to gain influence and power. We have to remember that in some of the Greek city-states, especially Athens, there were democratic enterprises that were beginning, experiments occurring. So the power of persuasion was significant. So these sophist thinkers were oftentimes looked at with suspicion by Athenians for being those who made the weak argument appear stronger. That's what you do when you persuade sometimes, is you persuade someone with an idea that seems to be weaker by making it appear stronger. So Socrates is getting really lumped in with and confused with a sophist. So he's being confused with both a naturalist / atheist and sophist here. So these charges against Socrates, these earlier accusations, ultimately have confused Socrates for being these two kinds of thinkers who were looked down upon in ancient Athens. And Socrates is saying, you see, these accusations came about because people just confused me with these other kinds of thinkers. But I'm neither of these kinds of thinkers. I'm not a naturalist atheist, and I'm not a sophist. And so Socrates, he's in some sense distancing himself from both of these kinds of thinkers and saying, look, I'm neither a naturalist, atheist, nor a sophist. In fact, this is what I was doing, but people misinterpreted what I was doing and just wanted to say that I was behaving like they were. So these earlier accusations are misguided. So this is really, now we've come full circle, how Socrates defends himself against his earlier accusers. Once we understand that Socrates is interpreting the oracle and the meaning of the claim that there's none wiser than he is, rather than going around being a practicing naturalist atheist or a practicing sophist, we'll see that Socrates should be seen as innocent with respect to these earlier slanders, quote unquote, against him. Okay, so that really concludes the first stage of Socrates' defense against his earlier accusers. I thank everyone for watching. If you have any questions, please post them below or send me an email, jedickin@syr.edu. naturalist.edu. Thanks again for watching. Bye-bye.